This week, we speak to two journalists who were on the ground in D.C. during the discovery of the DC-5 babies, when most media turned a blind eye or chose to sanitize the story of the abortion in favor of demonizing Lauren Handy. These journalists dug deeper. What set them apart from other reporters? Gathering information on the scene, talking to sources, viewing the evidence. They would tell you that they were just doing their job. As the case of the DC-5 painfully highlights, there is a severe lack of journalistic curiosity when it comes to reporting on potential abortion crimes. We speak with Sam Dorman of Epoch Times and Mary Margaret Olahan of the Daily Signal to get an inside look at what they saw firsthand and why their colleagues in the national media turned a blind eye. This is Episode 3 of Exposed: Abortion in America, the DC-5 Pressed for the Truth. Can you say your full name for me, your title, and your affiliation?
Sure. Sam Dorman. I'm a Washington correspondent for the Epoch Times and cover courts and politics.
I know that you were heavily involved in reporting on this case. Who are the DC-5, as you know them?
They were relatively unknown, and we still don't really know much about their background. Well, there's speculation that they've undergone illegal abortions, but we're not sure with all of them. But we know experts have pointed to the possibility that some of these, at least some of the abortions were illegal. And, you know, you can tell from the photos they endured things like dismemberment and other types of procedures.
And Sam, how did this case even get on your radar?
Yeah, so I got a call from Teresa. I talked with her about it, and then I saw the babies for myself.
Sam, let me just stop you right there. Outside of Lauren, I haven't spoken to anyone, and certainly not any journalist, that saw firsthand. How do you feel like that impacted your reporting?
To be honest with you, it was one of the most shocking moments of my life. It was, you don't usually see not only dead bodies, but dead bodies that are in that kind of a state where their limbs and their torso has literally been shredded, and you can see the inside of them. It was tough. I mean, honestly, I think I wrote the story a day or two after I saw the babies. Really tough to see, really tough to go through the footage, and I had to look at the footage in detail so that I could ask the experts that I was interviewing about the types of injuries that these babies had endured and the types of abortions that they potentially went through, and also to determine gestational age. So it was a lot of time just looking at this very graphic footage, which I'm glad Live Action published it because I think it's important for the public to see, but it's just very difficult to look at.
And have you ever covered anything like this before?
Well, I've covered abortion and fetal tissue trafficking in the past, so that gets into some pretty, difficult details. But I've never actually covered something where I've seen dead bodies like this, and it didn't seem like the DC government was doing that much. So I focused a lot on, I guess, looking at how the coverage was unfolding, looking at what Congress was doing. I think a lot of it, it's just there's kind of this disparity between how certain subjects are treated by the law and by the media. And you can clearly see that unborn children don't get the same kind of attention that other people do.
And how so? What do you mean, Sam?
In general, the way the media describes the issue and the way that the judicial system handles this, it just seems like they don't recognize objective facts pointing to what is obviously, the humanity of unborn children. And this is just like objective facts that we can look at from the National Library of Medicine about fetal development. We can look at what former abortion workers have said about babies that they've seen both in the womb and when they come out. And so, they have their own set of DNA. At certain stages, they have everything that we consider to be part of a normal human being. Regardless of what you believe about the politics of this or the morality of abortion, federal law does require that children from botched abortions receive the same care that other human beings do. I think in terms of showing people what the actual result of abortion is never going to be an easy thing for media outlets to do. But you have to ask yourself, is it actually worth it? If you're talking about abortion in one way, you're framing it in one way, are you going to show the reality of it? Or are you just going to talk about it in a way that sort of portrays it as a political debate, only involving the humanity of the mother? The media has a pro-abortion bias. This has been documented a lot. And like studies from the Media Research Center, and just in general, you can tell when they say things like a fetus that was born, what does that mean? You're not going to say a baby? Like, why are they so reluctant to just say that a human being is a baby? What is preventing them? We know, for example, that Planned Parenthood provides awards for people who are in the media. I'm not sure if that's a huge incentive for some reporters, but I think there's definitely a culture within media outlets where they're resistant to tell the truth about abortion. And I think some of that is also because they're not educated on it. I think they don't know what actually happens during an abortion. They don't know the reality of fetal development.
Are we pulling back the curtain a little bit? Are we seeing inside something that might typify what's happening across the country in different areas? And if so, what could we learn from this case in order to better correct and have safeguards so there aren't these violations against federal abortion law?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't really know how you prevent people from breaking the law, right? I definitely think if there's more media pressure, for example, in DC, then you would see potentially the local government being willing to do something like an autopsy. Like I said, this is something that occurs on a daily basis. These types of procedures occur on a daily basis and at a very high rate. So I think that it drew attention to the issue in a way that I think informs and educates the public. And so I'm hoping that media outlets, not just the mainstream media outlets, but other media outlets are more willing to discuss and do the actual work of reporting, the scientific detail of what happens during fetal development, what happens to a baby during an abortion, and then as well as reporting on things like David Daleid's investigations or Live Action's investigations, which indicate that there's fetal tissue trafficking going on, or that there's trafficking within abortion facilities.
And you were one of only a few who covered this story, and then one of only a handful that acknowledged the personhood of the DC-5 babies. And you allowed them to be central in your stories.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that even with clear signs of life in preborn children, there's almost this reflexive fear against revealing that truth within the media. So you have media outlets that are describing babies as, for example, a fetus that was born, or describing a heartbeat as fetal pulsing. No one is saying that you shouldn't acknowledge structural or other issues like economic issues that may lead a woman to abortion, or even that the media should ignore the hardship that women in crisis pregnancies face. But if you're going to be honest with your audience, this is just journalistic ethics. You should provide both sides of the story. You should provide as much transparency as possible. And I think that includes things like information on fetal development, or the fact that a heartbeat or so-called fetal pulsing occurs as early as 6 weeks. And, what I appreciate about Live Action's coverage is that you can say, they're a pro-life group or whatever you want about them, but still, they were doing actual journalism where other media outlets just simply refused to do it. There was coverage about Lauren and how she was allegedly a fetus hoarder or whatever, and the clinic in general, but there was nowhere the amount of exposure and the amount of detail that Live Action provided in terms of the exposure of just what those babies potentially went through. And it's a little bit troubling, because I think the First Amendment, and this is pretty straightforward, the First Amendment as it relates to the press is there primarily to keep institutions in check and challenge power through things like exposure, the type of exposure that Live Action does. And so live action through publishing those photos of the babies, and also things like the animated abortion procedures that they do. They're revealing what an abortion is actually like, and I don't think most people even know what occurs in the abortion, or even how long certain, what type of fetal development occurs before an abortion actually happens. And it's interesting too, because you can see in the reaction to the DC-5 and in reaction to live action's abortions video campaigns, you can see that people are changing their minds about the practice, or at least they're being more, they're learning more about what's actually happening. And if anything, that's why media outlets should include as much detail as possible. And it's not because journalists have a responsibility to push a pro-life narrative, but it's because if there's something that would influence or that would change your audience's mind, or at least have a big impact on the way they're perceiving a particular story. Again, it's just very basic journalistic ethics to be upfront and honest with your readers about those details. Our job as journalists is to expose the truth. So if we want to challenge powers, through our reporting, who else is the biggest victim of violence perpetrated through some kind of dominance than preborn children? And I think that's just really like a question that we should think critically about it. It's just remove the politics from it. You just look at the people who are feeling violence. But yeah, I kind of want to ask my colleagues in the media, who's more marginalized than the babies who shoulder the weight of the oppression that leads women to abortions? Because if we want to challenge structure, or we want to challenge power and structures of power, then we should focus on the people who are victims of that. And just more generally, there's so much hypocrisy in the way the media covers this issue. When you look at how the DC-5 was covered or wasn't covered, again, it wasn't really based on the scientific facts or the medical evidence of what actually happened to these babies. A lot of it was focused more on Lauren. Look at the ethics of that and have a debate about that. But I think that it shows some kind of bias.
What was the reaction from people that you heard about your reporting?
I think people were mostly shocked. The day that story came out, I had gone over to my friend's house and I was holding the baby that they had just had while the dad was looking through the story. And it was, I think both of them were just like, they were just shocked. And of course, it came right before Roe v. Wade was overturned. And so I think that it did a lot to inform people about what's happening during these abortions. I covered abortion for a while and I'd write about it, but it wasn't until, for example, I saw how abortion procedures are performed, I think that intensified my interest in the issue, because I understood what was actually happening, in raw terms, how actual human beings were being affected. And so I think that seeing these babies, it was shocking. Like, you can see the pictures. One of the babies looks like it's fully intact. The other one, another one who might be a victim of partial birth abortion, it looks like her brains are coming out or protruding from her head. And you actually see, for example, the intestines hanging out of a baby's stomach. It's just something that you probably can never get out of your head. And I think those are the types of raw human experiences that drive people to report on certain issues. Because again, we're talking about humans here. And I think as journalists, we should be focused on victimization and sort of challenging the power that hurts human beings, either directly or indirectly. Just personally for me, I think just reporting on abortion as much as I have, I'm pretty skeptical about places like the DC government doing something in this kind of situation, especially given how liberal DC's abortion law is. But it certainly, there was congressional responses or congressional letters, and there are politicians who are interested in this. It just depends on whether or not there's political will within the administration and within the DC government to actually try and uncover what happened to these babies.
This is Mary Margaret Olahan. I'm a senior reporter for the Daily Signal, and I cover politics and culture for them.
Mary Margaret, can you tell me when and how you became aware of the DC-5 babies?
I first became aware of this story after I saw pictures of the babies that they found in those boxes on social media. And I was deeply disturbed by these images. And, as a reporter who takes this very seriously, oftentimes when we see gruesome or horrible images on the internet, they are not super new. You might see old things resurface, and you got to check and make sure that A, they're real, B, that they're not photoshopped, that they're coming from a reputable source. And so I kept an eye on this story, and I noticed that a lot of people weren't covering it. There was the only mainstream reporters that were covering this, some more liberal mainstream outlets, from a certain angle. And their angle was that police had discovered fetuses in the homes of these anti-abortion activists. Well, the reality of the situation was these pro-life activists had been at the abortion clinic. They got the box, they took it home, they found the babies. They were horrified to see that some of these babies looked like they might have been victims of partial birth abortions, or potentially aborted in violation of the Born Alive Protection Act. And so they took pictures of the babies to document it, and then they called the police and said, "We have these babies, come collect them." But of course, the media that reported it as these crazy women have babies in their house and it might be illegal. And I was unsurprised by this, but I was bothered because I was pretty sure that wasn't what the story was. And so when I connected with the activists, Teresa and Lauren, and I got the full story, I was, obviously horrified. I had to look at the pictures of the babies, and that was incredibly hard and sad. And I was grateful to talk with experts at the Lazier Institute who could break down for me what they thought had happened to those babies. And at the time, I was working for the Daily Wire, and we were able to report a story describing, the babies and the activist story, and what researchers believe had happened to these babies and what DC was doing about it.
As a journalist, you mentioned something very interesting, that you have to really verify the photo evidence or video evidence that you receive. Why is that super important, and how are you able to confidently verify these?
I interact with a lot of activists on a lot of different issues, and sometimes people seem hurt when you have to verify things, or you have to make sure that they're telling the truth. But in the long run, they should be grateful for that, because the more thoroughly you tell someone's story and the more accurately you tell someone's story, the more likely that the mainstream media will report on it, because if they can trust the facts, and if they're forced to trust your facts, that's a good thing for everyone. In this case, we established that Live Action had photographed them, and that PAAU had been the group that had found them. And we were able to, very tragically, I was able to see videos of them unboxing the babies. And, I got a lot of evidence there to see what actually had gone on, and a lot of details that made me feel comfortable reporting this story, including that I reached out many times to Washington Surgery Clinic, to the National Abortion Federation, which is handling comms for Washington Surgery Clinic, to Curtis Bay Medical Waste Facility, to Planned Parenthood Baltimore City Center, and the Department of Health and Human Services, because all of these organizations were involved in this in some way, shape, or form. And so I was doing my job and asking everyone for clarity on these issues.
Can I stop you there? This is fascinating to me. Did you just say that the National Abortion Federation is handling comms, like PR work for the abortionists for the Washington Surgery Center?
Yes, they have been. They do not answer me. They don't answer me at all. Most of the institutions I just mentioned were stonewalling me. And they do know that very few journalists will report on this kind of thing. When they do, they encounter so many roadblocks that a lot of the time it's not worth continuing to report on. And so people give up. And in this case, honestly, they were right. This all initially happened in 2022. Well, now it's 2024 and we're hearing more on it. But that was 2 years ago. So with the National Abortion Federation, they've been very quiet on this, but I ended up going to Washington Surgery Clinic to try and talk to the abortionist myself, because I couldn't get answers from anyone.
You alluded to it earlier, but you mentioned a particular spin or focus that corporate media or the mainstream media were taking on this story. And what was very apparent to me when I read all of these articles from, say, Washington Post or others was that you could have read the entire article and not even acknowledged that there was an abortionist. Why do you think there's a lack of journalistic curiosity from your peers in the media outside of the roadblocks that you were talking about?
Well, I think that the lack of journalistic curiosity is a nice way of putting it. Planned Parenthood has the reporters that they know they should go to. I am sure the National Abortion Federation does the same. And in this case, it seemed very clear that the talking points went out that, A, we do not mention the abortionist or the abortion clinic. We don't mention anything that would humanize these fetal remains, which is what they called them, or fetuses, fetal remains or fetuses.
I'm looking at what the National Abortion Federation are calling the DC-5 now in their latest communications, and you might not be shocked to learn that they're using the term quote unquote post-abortion tissue.
No, that doesn't surprise me at all, but that's disgusting. It seems pretty apparent that the word on the street was, if you're reporting on this topic, the women that found these babies are crazy and you should paint them as such. If you didn't know about this story, you would think, oh my gosh, there's an insane woman that has fetuses in her house. And the implication there is that she did something to the fetuses. It's very disturbing. The implication is like, oh my gosh, was this crazy woman killing babies in her house? Like, that's what you're left with. And it's very ironic considering the fact that no, those babies were actually killed by someone else, and she's actually very staunchly against the murder of unborn babies. So it's a very sad and twisted way to report on this story. And frankly, on the part of the reporters who did that, it's very dishonest. I even saw there was a Washington Post reporter who went to a press conference that I also went to, that the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising held shortly afterwards. And this Washington Post reporter came, and the reporter I don't even think she asked anyone any questions, didn't report on any of the aspects of that press conference that you would think would be the most pivotal or moving. And I remember looking at her and thinking, wow, what is your life like that you choose to tell these stories in this way? And you obviously overlook the truth here. It's just very sad to me.
Mary Margaret, one of the things that I noticed about your reporting that was very detailed was your reporting on Dr. Santangelo himself. Can you describe what you learned about this particular individual who was the abortionist?
So Dr. Santangelo is unfortunately infamous in the pro-life, I would say in the world of pro-life activism, because a live-action investigator recorded him talking about how he would allow babies to die if they were accidentally delivered during abortions. In short, the conversation indicated that Santangelo has ways that he can handle it if the baby is born alive and the mom doesn't want the baby to be. And so with that context, that is very disturbing. And Washington Surgery Clinic won't talk to me about it. I obviously emailed them many times. I have asked them in person. And the Metropolitan Police Department, which is the police of Washington, D.C., which should be interested in knowing whether an abortionist is letting babies die after abortions, or worse, killing babies that are born alive through a botched abortion. MPD told me they can't talk about it because the investigation is ongoing. And, I repeatedly pressed them about that over the past couple of years, asking them, what's the status of this investigation? Is this investigation still open? They told me it is. And then they slipped up earlier this year when they confirmed to me the investigation is ongoing. And they said that in response to my question about the babies. So, of course, we posted a story saying MPD says that they're investigating the babies. And then the DC officials kind of freaked out. And I got a couple urgent emails saying, no, we're not investigating the babies. We're investigating Lauren Handy and the way she found them.
Oh.
So that's their twist on this. You know, they're not concerned about whether the babies were illegally aborted. And frankly, that's probably because most politicians who are in D.C. on the left or who are in high-profile positions, the stance is that abortion is allowed without limit. And so they don't view abortion up until birth, or apparently after birth, as problematic.
I want to go back to Dr. Santangelo really quickly. One thing I noticed in your reporting is you said, quote, I drove to abortionist Dr. Cesar Santangelo's $1 million home. And you mentioned his multiple complaints of medical malpractice and one lawsuit. Anything you can add there?
Oh, yeah, that gives me chills just thinking about that. There was one lawsuit that accused him of bungling the removal of a baby so badly that the mother ended up with fetal debris in her lungs and she died. Really, really horrible. And I did go to his $1 million home. No one was home. I knocked a bunch of times and no one came to the door. And so I went to the abortion clinic instead.
And when you were at the Washington Surgery Center, I read that you said you spoke to some women there. Can you share any stories of what you learned from the women there at the center?
So as I was entering, I noticed this woman coming out with a guy, and they were visibly upset about something or just stressed or angsty. And I noticed that on my way in, but I was kind of focused on what I was doing, so I didn't pay a lot of attention to them. I put on my mask and I go in, and there's a little waiting room with a bunch of women sitting there, very small, kind of dingy. And there were two women behind the desk. I said, well, actually, I'd like to talk to Dr. Santangelo. Is he here? And they didn't like that. They seemed kind of startled. Then when I explained, as you know, you have to identify yourself as a reporter, I told them that I was a reporter and I wanted to talk to him. Then they were not happy at all and told me I had to leave and if there was something they could tell me. And one of the women was being particularly aggressive with me. So I looked at the other one who was seated and she looked kind of nervous. And I did tell her, I said, you know, this is a big deal. It's possible he's doing illegal abortions. There's going to be investigations into this clinic. And I don't remember exactly how I worded it, but I did say, like, you should talk to me about this because this is going to be a big deal. And ultimately I left because, you know, you can't stay when they tell you to leave. And so I did. And I went outside and the door shut behind me. And I was about to leave, but I was really frustrated. I kind of paused for a moment and I looked to my right and there was the woman and the man that I had seen on my way in. And the guy, I noticed his eyes. They were all red and bloodshot. And he looked really upset, like he had been crying. And then I looked at the woman and she was like moaning and leaning on the wall. And I was like, what's the matter? And she told me that she was in the middle of an abortion. So she literally in the hall had begun to deliver her baby. And, you know, it was like the beginning of labor. So she obviously, like, the baby was still inside of her. She's all sweaty and panting and visibly in pain. And the guy is obviously distraught. And as we're talking, the abortion clinic worker stuck her head out the door and was like to her, don't talk to her. I was just thinking about how the abortionist that was performing it, he has been accused of allowing babies to die, of delivering late-term babies, of horrible things. And she was very far along. And, you know, I felt pretty helpless. I was trying to report this story and I couldn't even get a hold of the abortionist that was doing this to her and to her baby.
Especially when you know what this center is being investigated for, and yet you watch this woman walk right into it.
You know, the abortion clinic worker was very aware that she did not want me talking to this couple. And I think that's very telling.
Yeah. Well, let's fast forward to where we are now, because you've done some recent reporting which is very striking. Some breaking news here. Can you just tell me where we are today?
The DC medical examiner has had the babies for the past 2 years. I've been reaching out to the DC medical examiner over and over and over and ever since 2022. He's told me, no, can't tell you anything. The mayor's office is handling comms for this. So, National Abortion Federation is handling the clinic's comms. Mayor is handling the DC medical examiner's comms. According to this lawyer, he was having a conversation with the DC medical examiner, who told him that he had been in touch with the DOJ, that allegedly told him that he could get rid of the babies now, and that if no one intervened, they were going to get rid of them by the end of the week. So that was on Friday. And so throughout the rest of the week, we didn't really hear anything until on Friday we found out that the ACLJ, I believe it is, and the ACLJ is it's a legal firm, I believe, that has been doing some really good work on this. They learned from the medical examiner that the medical examiner did not plan to destroy the babies' bodies on Friday. And this was partially due to the fact that all these congressional letters had been sent, and partially due to the fact that multiple different organizations had reached out to the medical examiner asking to dispose of the bodies. And so my understanding is that the medical examiner has to sort through all these requests before they can do anything with the babies. I text the girl who does comms for Mayor Bowser. I have her number. She'll text me, other topics about what's going on in the city, hoping that I'll write about them. But when I started reaching out about this, she said, I'll check on it for you. And I haven't heard from her since. And I know she gets my texts, but they're choosing not to address it. DOJ declined to comment. That's them choosing not to address it. And again, I think they're hoping that this will all fade into oblivion and no one will care, because there's, very few reporters that will actually touch this and report on it, on the truth in this manner. But I thought that Senator Ted Cruz had a particularly good response to this. Let me see if I can pull this up for you, because we reached out to him. He's been very vocal about these developments. And Senator Cruz told us, after we found out that the babies would not be disposed of on Friday, that he goes, in case the office later gets cold feet and starts thinking about destroying evidence, here's a free reminder. Every person involved will be subpoenaed for a very unpleasant conversation at a committee hearing, which I thought was pretty fiery.
So at this point, we do not know what's going to happen with the bodies, correct?
We don't really know what will happen next. I'm still holding out hope that there's someone that will come to me from one of these offices and be willing to share with me what they know and do the right thing and tell me details that we haven't been able to uncover, because the mayor's office has been very closed book about this. DC medical examiner clearly realizes that this is a big deal, clearly fielding phone calls from some scary people. And as we talked about before, the National Abortion Federation is involved in this as well, in protecting Santangelo. So there's some major players involved in this scandal, and they would love for it to go away.
Yeah, I mean, as a journalist, one of your primary jobs is to hold powerful people to account and to expose the truth at the same time. What would you urge your colleagues in the media to do at this time?
I would urge them to be reaching out with questions. One dead end that I hit was the Curtis Bay Medical Waste Facility. I have photos and videos of the babies in the boxes that has their labeling all over it. And Curtis Bay Medical Waste Facility, they transport that medical waste back to their facilities in Baltimore to be incinerated. And that incineration helps to facilitate some of Baltimore's electricity. So That's a really disturbing angle that I think someone could be following up on. I think that a reporter that has a good relationship with the National Abortion Federation, they should be asking the National Abortion Federation about this, trying to get more information. I found that abortionists have huge egos, so they seem to like to talk to media. Maybe Santangelo would talk to someone if it wasn't myself or someone that they might already be aware of. I've spoken with multiple abortionists that aren't Santangelo, and they seem to love to talk about themselves. So that seems like an easy get.
Why is this story still newsworthy and worth the time for Americans to really understand and push for more information on?
Well, it's really important because, first of all, in the nation's capital, no one should be able to get away with a crime. I mean, a little ironic because we have a lot of crime going on here in DC. But especially when it comes to the most vulnerable among us, even if you believe that abortion should be legal, there's no way that any person with a soundly formed conscience is going to be okay with a baby being allowed to die or killed after that baby survives a botched abortion. And for anyone who is even slightly familiar with partial birth abortion, that is an incredibly gruesome and completely unacceptable abortion technique. This is a big deal. And like I said, even if you're someone that supports abortion, this is something that you should be paying attention to and caring about, because if this is acceptable, then what isn't? And if we don't even try to hold people accountable or investigate to see whether they're committing crimes, that very much indicates to the public that when it comes to certain ideological issues, anything will fly. And that is hugely, hugely detrimental to our society. Then also, of course, for the pro-life community, this is a huge, grave, very sad scandal. It's kind of insult upon injury when we already know the horrible things that are happening in abortion clinics, and then you literally have the bodies of these babies as evidence, and officials look the other way and try and tell you that nothing went wrong, that no crime was committed. So it is just, as one pro-lifer told me, he said, we literally handed Republicans a box of baby bodies as evidence to show them what is going on, and they need to do something about this. And I think that's the sentiment that a lot of pro-lifers are feeling.
Mary Margaret, thank you for sharing your insight and the background on this, because you have been following this for so many years, and thank you for not giving up on reporting.
No, thank you. I'm glad for an opportunity to talk about it.
Both Sam and Mary Margaret urge their colleagues in the media to remember their foundational call as reporters, to hold people in power to account and to expose the truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth may be. From Exposed, Abortion in America, the DC-5, this is Episode 3, Pressed for the Truth. Join us for our next episode as we travel to DC's Capitol Hill to hear from members of Congress on why they will not be silent and why they're still speaking up 2 years later to bring resolution and rest to the DC-5 babies. Time is critical, as the bodies of these children, the DC-5, could be sent to the incinerator any day. If you, like us, want an investigation and an autopsy done to confirm the truth of the children's untimely death, please contact Mayor Muriel Bowser and the DC Chief of Police. Tell them you demand justice and for them to not destroy the bodies of the DC-5 babies.